Okay, today we have a special speaker, so I'm recording this a little bit earlier, so you might not see anybody or much of anybody sitting in the audience. Today I'm going to talk about the handwriting on the wall, and we talk each week about the convergence of signs. Now, I have a very severe time limitation today because of our guest speaker, so I'm going to go through this pretty fast. I'm going to skip around a little bit. I really don't think, as I've been preparing these things and doing these things for probably 10 or 15 years now, that in the last month I've had so much information to try to boil down to an hour and 15 minutes. And today, when I finished getting everything in that I wanted to get in, I noticed I had about 180 slides, which there's no way I'm going to get that done in an hour. So I'll do the best that I can, but in the last couple of weeks, I mean, it's summer vacation, folks. I mean, can't geopolitics take a vacation for a couple weeks too, so we can get caught up? So a couple verses to keep in mind today to kind of put the framework. 2 Timothy chapter 3. Just know also that in the last days, perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. And then one that I think is particularly relevant this week, in Matthew chapter 24, in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus answers a question of his disciples and says this in verse 6, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places." So let's just look at some of the things that have been going on in the world over the last couple of weeks. And some of the stuff is a little over a week old because I just didn't have time to get to it last week. So I'm going to try to get through it, but there's some really good analysis. And one of the things I try to do here too is to not necessarily just give you the straight news, straight mainstream media news, but to try to delve into some of the analysis and intelligence reports about what's going on so that you can understand a little bit of the background on some of these things. And I have a couple fantastic articles today that I will get to. But let's just look at some things. Here's a report of the Independent in England. Gonorrhea antibiotics are rendered ineffective by STI's high level of resistance, the World Health Organization warns. And so as these diseases increase, and there's also reports of this starting to happen in the United States, that in certain sexually active communities, there are drug-resistant, sexually transmitted diseases and infections that are taking root. And this will have very serious consequences for really the health of our own country. Here's an interesting statistic from economics comparing government employees to manufacturing employees in the United States. And you now see that government employees now outnumber manufacturing employees, state, local, federal government employees, now outnumber manufacturing employees in the United States by almost 10 million workers. I would just suggest to you that, and with all due apologies to my friends that work in the government, that is not sustainable. That is a harbinger of very serious economic trouble. This week, just concerns that the Fed is going to pull back a little bit on these cheap interest rates, 0% interest rates, and maybe raise the interest rate a quarter or half a point, caused the market to fall pretty severely at the end of the week. But we have this high national debt in the United States. Here's some graphics that I found on comparison to the U.S. national debt, which is now north of $19.5 trillion. If you add up the value of all the S&P 500 companies, they are valued less than the national debt. So the 500 biggest companies in the United States, their entire value, stock value, is less than the United States. In fact, Apple, which is I think still the most valuable, if you had 33 apples, if you sold off 33 apples, Apple companies, you would not be able to pay off the national debt. That is not sustainable. Here's another graphic. The U.S. national debt is 25 times higher than the value of all oil exported in 1 year. So everybody talks about the problem of big oil. Well, and hardly anybody ever talks anymore about the problem of big government. So the government debt is if you sold all the oil in the world for 25 years, it would take you to pay off the U.S. national debt. That's if you didn't pay costs of production or anything for that oil. This is just simply not sustainable. And here's another one is, well, let's just, we'll take people's cash and we'll take their gold and all this other stuff and we'll pay off the debt, right? This one I think is the most chilling of all the statistics. The U.S. national debt is more than all of the world's physical cash, gold, silver, and Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies combined. Those total somewhere less than and they total about $13 trillion. So you would have to take all the cash, all the gold, all the silver in the world that's known, and you would still be $6 trillion short of paying off the United States debt. That, by the way, I would add to you, that's just the debt of the federal government. That are not unfunded liabilities of state, state and local governments on pensions and that type of thing, which total somewhere probably, by some estimates, they're 90 trillion to 100 trillion. I've seen as high as over $200 trillion that it would take to pay all those obligations. I can't let today pass without mentioning that this is the 15th anniversary of the attack on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, and then, of course, Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania. There is a great article by Stephen Brill. Now, Stephen Brill does a very good job. I don't agree with him a lot, but he writes very long-form articles. He used to do this when he was running American Lawyer, and he was really one of the first people on the internet back in the days of the American Lawyer. Steve Brill's, I can't remember the name of the company that he had back in those days, but the internet really took off for lawyers during the O.J. Simpson trial, which was about 20 years ago. So Brill is a very good writer. Like I said, I don't agree with him at all, but he has a very, very long article in The Atlantic. I don't have time to go into any of it this morning, but there is also, if you go to YouTube, to the Atlantic YouTube channel, they had a symposium, and there's probably a dozen 20-minute videos that go into, with different experts and panels, talking about how we're doing since 9/11. The sum and total of it is we're not doing very well. Things are not really any better. In fact, they're probably worse. I would also recommend, and I don't have time to go into it at all, is this report by Charles K. Ortel. If you go to charlesortel.com, O-R-T-E-L, charlesortel.com, you can download this report. The report is called False Philanthropy, a summary review of selected intentionally false representations in Clinton Foundation public filings. And the information in this report is absolutely shocking and stunning. And when you couple that with the FBI release of the documents on the Hillary Clinton investigation, it is absolutely unbelievable. I'll try to put a link to this in the show notes, the YouTube description, www.charlesortel.com. It just came out. He's a very good analyzer, forensic investigator, and he's pulled this apart. And the things that have happened with the Clinton Foundation, just if you look at the sale of 20% of the U.S. stock of enriched uranium to Russia, which was approved by the Clinton Foundation after Bill Clinton had gone to Russia and made over $500,000 in speeches, if I recall correctly. It's just absolutely shocking. By the way, another recommendation, and I don't have a link to this, but if you go to Secure Freedom Radio, it's a radio show that is done each week by Frank Gaffney every day. On, I believe, Wednesday or Thursday, there's a segment where he interviewed Diana West. Diana West wrote a great book that I would recommend everybody read, American Betrayal. And they go into some of the things that are going on. I'll talk about that a little bit later in this if I have time. I want to do this. I hate to bring this up each week, but I think this is really important. We know that Iowa has put in place rules about transgender bathrooms, and they say they're going to apply to churches if the church is open for public accommodation. In other words, if the church has a spaghetti supper or something, that's considered being open to the public. So unless the church limits its gatherings to just its members, they're going to have to spend money, and some of pastor friends that I've seen talking about this online have said that the cost of changing over a bathroom in their church is going to be one stall is like $25,000. And so this has a huge economic impact, and this is stunning. But now Massachusetts has come out, that's a Massachusetts with the rainbow flag there, has come out with these gender identity guidance, and they say this. In 2016, the legislature in Massachusetts formally codified this prohibition of discrimination on the basis of gender identity in places of employment, housing, mortgage services, and places of public accommodation. In the report, they later say this: even a church could be seen as a place of public accommodation if it holds a secular event such as a spaghetti supper that is open to the general public. Now listen, this is what I said when this happened a while ago with Iowa. Everything at FBC has a religious purpose. Nothing should be considered a matter of public accommodation. But this is what the left is trying to do. They're trying to destroy and break down things. And I'm going to show you something in a minute that I think you will find stunning. On Friday, the U.S. Civil Rights Commission released a report called Peaceful Coexistence. Now, these are the people that are in charge. Ultimately, there's 5 commissioners in the Civil Rights Commission, usually 3 from one party, 2 from the other. Of course, the president always has the right to appoint the one to be the tiebreaker. 4 of the 5 commissioners agreed with this report. It's called Peaceful Coexistence, Reconciling Non-Discrimination Principles with Civil Liberties. Because there is a conflict, because there are things that, as a Christian, our conscience will not permit us to do. It does not matter to these fascists that are in charge of the Civil Rights Commission. They don't care about your religion. Listen to some of the things that are said in here. Here is the statement of Chairman Martin Castro, chairman of the statement. The government, he cites the government of the United States, a statement by John Adams, the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. That is the operative term that guides everything that the 4 of these 5 commissioners have said in this report. You have to keep that in mind. Listen to what he says. The phrases religious liberty and religious freedom will stand for nothing except hypocrisy so long as they remain code words for discrimination, intolerance, racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, Christian supremacy, or any other form of intolerance. That is the head of the Civil Rights Commission. He does not care one whit about civil liberties. He only cares about all of these identity politics that have, the victim mentality that they institute and put into all the law. He says this: religious liberty was never intended to give one religion. And here's the problem. He is a product of the education system in the United States. You have to have common sense beat out of you for years. And so when I see somebody saying something so supremely idiotic and moronic, my usual question now is, what graduate school did you go to? And so he says this: religious liberty was never intended to give one religion dominion over other religions or veto power over the civil rights and civil liberties of others. Now listen, when you unpack this, what he's saying is, you keep your morality there. We don't care if it's a collective morality. We want religion has no voice, no say in American life. That's the operative thing. Karen Naraski, she also said this: enshrined in the First Amendment to our Constitution, the right to exercise one's religion free from government interference is an essential civil and human right firmly embedded in the core of our country's DNA. But then she goes on and says this: also enshrined in our Constitution is the fundamental principle that all persons are guaranteed equal protection under the law. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and inalienable rights proclaimed by our founders in the Declaration of Independence are unattainable if one cannot live free from discrimination and be treated fairly under the law. In other words, throw morality out. You can't have moral-based laws. That's what they're saying. This is absolutely stunning to me. Commissioner Peter Kirsanov said this: the subject of this briefing was the tension between non-discrimination principles and religious liberty. The majority has resolved this tension resoundingly in favor of non-discrimination. In other words, everything that you have, their findings are just stunning. Look at some of the findings. This is from the Washington Times article, said that religious freedom and religious liberty become merely code words for intolerance and other things. Here's some of their findings. Schools must be allowed to insist on inclusive values. Throughout history, religious doctrines accepted at one time later become viewed as discriminatory, with religions changing accordingly. You have to understand where this is going, folks. This is going against all organized religion. Without exemptions, groups would not use the pretext of religious doctrines to discriminate. A doctrine that distinguishes between beliefs, which should be protected, and conduct, which should conform to the law, is fairer and easier to apply. So in other words, you can believe all the morality that you want, but you cannot act on it in any way. This is where it's going. It's not where it's going. It's where it is. Third parties, such as employees, should not be forced to live under the religious doctrines of their employers unless the employer is allowed to impose such constraints by virtue of the ministerial exception. A basic civil right, number 6, is as important to the freedom to marry, should not be subject to religious beliefs. And number 7, even a widely accepted doctrine such as the ministerial exemption should be subject to review as to whether church employees have religious duties. Here's the standard of review, commissioners on the Civil Rights Commission. Congress shall make no law. It's very clear. It says here, the commission endorses the briefing panel's statements in support of these findings as summarized at page 26 of the report. Listen to what these say, their recommendations. Overly broad religious exemptions unduly burden non-discrimination laws and policy. Federal and state courts, lawmakers, and policymakers at every level must tailor religious exceptions to civil liberties and civil rights protections as narrowly as applicable as the law requires. Okay, here's what the law requires. Make no law. That's very, very simple, inhibiting the free exercise of religion. RFRA, the Religious Freedoms Restoration Act, protects only religious practitioners' First Amendment's free exercise rights, and it does not limit others' freedom from government-imposed religious limitations under the Establishment Clause. 3, in absence of controlling authority to the contrary, such as state-level RFRA-type statute, the recognition of religious exemptions to non-discrimination laws and policies should be made pursuant to the holdings of Employment Division versus Smith, which protects religious beliefs rather than conduct. This is a horrible decision. It goes on. Federal legislation should be considered to clarify that RFRA creates First Amendment free exercise rights only for individuals and religious institutions, and only to the extent that they do not unduly burden civil liberties and civil rights protections against status-based discrimination. Folks, I am telling you, I cannot begin to tell you the sense of concern and even internal rage that I am feeling over the direction that this is going. And you need to know, Obama still has what he has, September, October, November, December. He has almost 5 months, 4 or 5 months left in office. What are they going to do in that 4 or 5 months? I told somebody the other day that if Trump happens to get elected, it will take years, and I guarantee you, it will take years to unwind the damage that the geopolitical wrecking ball known as Barack Obama has done to the United States and the Constitution and the freedoms and liberties that we're guaranteed thereunder. And if the other person is elected, you'll see in a minute that it won't good. So here's the last recommendation. States with RFRA style laws should amend those statutes to clarify that RFRA creates First Amendment free exercise rights. I think, did I just read that one? No, that they should, for individuals and religious institutions. States with laws modeled after RFRA must guarantee that those statutes do not unduly burden civil liberties and civil rights with status-based discrimination. It talks about the fight that's been going on about this, and that the fight to make religious-based exemptions to non-discrimination laws preeminent over status-based civil liberties protections is characterized often is a battle being waged by some Christians who purport to speak for all Christians. This is a quotation from the report. On the contrary, okay, so you people who want to control everything, you religious nuts, you religious extremists that want to control everybody's life, that's what they're referring to. Now, here's the example that they like. On the contrary, many Christian denominations and individuals support the notion that religious freedom can and should be expressed through principles and actions geared toward inclusion and toward the recognition and expansion of the rights of others. For example, the United Church of Christ provides a designation of open and affirming to congregations, campus ministries, and other bodies in the UCC which make a public covenant. They need to change their name because they're insulting the Lord that they claim to follow. By the way, sidebar, I was in 7th grade, and I had a teacher, science teacher, and she came in one day, and she started talking. Now, I had just saw the day before her engagement announcement in the newspaper, and I liked this teacher. She was a good teacher, and it said where she went to church and where she was going to get married, and it was the United Church of Christ. So she came in the next day because my dad said, "Hey, that's your science teacher that she got engaged." It was like the next day or the day after that, she comes in and she starts talking about the myths in the Bible, Jonah, and she sounded like Andy Stanley. And this is like 40 years ago. I was in 7th grade, so that would have been 1967, 66 or 67. So 40 years ago. 50 years ago. Where'd all those, I lost a decade somewhere. So she comes in and she said, all the myths in the Bible, and evolution is true, and these myths and stories they used to tell by the campfires about Jonah and Jericho and all this stuff. And I said, they're not myths, in front of the class. I put up my hand. Johnny, what do you want? John. They're not myths, and I won't say her name. They're true. And for you to go to a church that has the name of Christ in it, and for you to say this stuff is very, very troubling. And I said that. I remember because a bunch of people in class came up to me and said, "Wow, I can't believe you said that." I still got my A, by the way. This is what the Bill of Rights says. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The one commissioner did speak out, Gail Harriet, a former George Mason Law School associate dean, who now teaches at the University of San Diego. She dissented. And she said this in a telephone interview: "I'm troubled by the growing attitude that somehow anti-discrimination laws trump everything. We live in a more complex world than that," she said in a telephone interview. Others offered a harsher judgment. "This commission is not only out of touch with reality, but also out of touch with our Constitution," said Matt Staver, chairman of Liberty Counsel. It is anti-American. The report is anti-American, anti-constitutional, misinformed position. So this is, I'm going to skip through these other slides. University of Virginia Law School professor said, I hope he has tenure, said this: "The Civil Rights Commission offered no coherent reason why the federal state versions of RFRA don't protect faith-based organizations or businesses, except to say that civil rights are of preeminent importance. This report gives no reason for preferring the rights of the same-sex couple, except that a majority of the commission chose up sides." And this is the problem. There's no base anymore. This really, as you can tell, bothers me. Okay, this is in the Hill. I haven't been reading the Hill too much. It's another blog and news gathering thing that's been on my. It's on my radar now because they write some pretty good stuff. They went in and they unpacked what Black Lives Matter says about itself. And folks, don't send me hate mail, okay? I'm not for blacks getting killed or anything like that. I'm about the truth. And I understand. You need to understand that leftist, communist, socialist principles have infected these organizations. You may think it's about one thing, but you need to unpack what they're really about and find out what they're really about. And this is what Black Lives Matter says about itself. "We are committed to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, and especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. They don't care about the family. It's a direct attack on the family. This is on the front page of the New York Times, I think yesterday. Ohio County spurs Trump, but is cool to Clinton. What Ohio County? Delaware County, the county that is where our church meets. Well, I'm sure Hillary Clinton will be open and tolerant of opposing views, right? Here's what she said the other day.
Generalistic.
Let me back it up.
You could put.
Hang on.
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
She did come out and apologize. She expressed regret for saying that half of the supporters are deplorables. I guess she meant that it's almost half. Maybe it's 47%. Folks, this is a despicable human being. And, you know, you can vote for her if you want. I'm just telling you, you're electing a despicable human being as President of the United States. I don't know how you can do it. I don't think you can justify it. I don't even want to argue with you about it. I think you're a fool if you vote for her. This is the week of the Hajj in Saudi Arabia. Here's a picture of, you can see the massive construction going on there. This is the annual thing where people get killed in stampedes. Last year there were, this is a graphic from the New York Times, and you can see where on the left where the red ends on Street 204 is where the crush happened. It extended back. People died in this crush of people for 1,000 feet. Almost a quarter of a mile of bodies in this crush because there were so many people trying to get through a choke point. Well, this week is, it was in Rosemont, Illinois, outside Chicago, near O'Hare Airport, the 53rd Annual ISNA Convention. They had people speaking there like Tariq Ramadan. He's the French individual that I spoke about a couple months ago. He is a Muslim Brotherhood front guy. He spoke. Now look, ISNA is related to the Muslim Brotherhood. There is a connection there. It's one of the, I believe, is one of the unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial, which mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood. One of the booths at this was Bridges to Common Ground. We have the Quran with references to the Bible, a contemporary understanding that's, again, that's trying to meld the religions together. And they talk about Jesus in the Quran, and they have a little graphic for all the things. But one of the speakers at this year's ISNA convention, Rick Warren has spoken there in the past, by the way, was Jay Johnson. Jay Johnson is the head of the Department of Homeland Security, and there you can find his remarks online. And here's just a little quote from it. The video's online too. You've heard President Obama and me call out the discrimination and vilification you face in this current climate. You have heard us say that the self-proclaimed Islamic State is neither Islam nor a state, that it is a group of terrorists attempting to hijack your religion. You have heard us before multiple audiences of different political stripes refuse to bend to the political pressure to call terrorism Islamic extremism. We know that ISIL, though its claims the banner of Islam, occupies no part of your religion, a religion founded on peace. I would suggest that you go. I don't have time to do it. This is Government Exhibit 003-0085 and the Holy Land Foundation Terror Trial. And this is a document. It is from the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, an explanatory memorandum on the general strategic goal for the group in North America. And what they say in this, and they identify the different groups that are aligned with them, which include ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America. It's headquartered. You can see the mosque and headquarters on Interstate 70, just past the Plainfield exit. I think it's just north of the freeway there, on the west side of, just west of Indianapolis. And they explained that they are going to do civilization jihad. They're going to institute Sharia through any number of means. There's, violent jihad. Sharia is, Phil Haney told us when he was here a week and a half ago in Columbus, jihad is a strategy. The goal is Sharia law. That's the goal. Jihad is a strategy, and it comes in different forms. There's violent jihad, there's civilizational jihad, there's jihad by immigration. And we see all of these operating in quite stark things. And remember this verse from the Quran, Surah 8:60, and prepare against those whatever you are able of power and of steeds of war by which you may what? Terrify the enemy of Allah and your enemy and others besides them, whom you do not know, but whom Allah knows. So in other words, that's what they're there for. Okay, now I'm going to jump to geopolitics. And I only have 120 slides to go and about 25 minutes to do it. So I'm not going to get through all of them, but there are some things going on, mostly centered in the Middle East, which I do think is a significant theater, the important theater of where things will happen in the end times. And some of the things that came out this week are just, they're like they're ripped off the pages of the Bible, the prophetic scriptures. So here's an article in The Sun the other day, World War III warning, planet closer to catastrophic World War III than in any time for 60 years, experts warn. And it doesn't look good for Britain or America if it does kick off. And also this week in the Telegraph, here's how World War III could start tomorrow. So look those up. Here's a great graphic from Triggers for World War III. And what you'll find is, and it was funny because I think I was talking to Jacob about coming here this weekend, and we talked about geopolitics for a while. I was traveling down to Cincinnati or someplace. And so we talked for about an hour, and one of the things we talked about was the triggers for World War III, and that there are all kinds of triggers all over the place. And then I come home, and this is in my news feed, that there are these triggers for World War III, and there are about 6 of them. South China Sea, Middle East, there's a couple, Ukraine, all of these places, and it would be very easy for any one of them to tip over and go to World War III. And I think that was before we heard about the next nuclear test in South Korea. Proximity of NATO and Russian bombers flying over Syria. They came within 10 feet of each other. And when you're going several hundred miles an hour, that's not much of a margin for error. Vladimir Putin's aggression in Eastern Europe and China's movements in the South China Sea are among them. Experts have also raised concerns about the instability of nuclear power in Pakistan as extremist factions and terrorist groups within the country grow in power. Adding to this is these groups' sworn opposition to neighboring India, which holds its own much coveted nuclear arsenal. British Admiral Lord West said this, basically none of us know what is going to happen, but we are in a more dangerous, chaotic, and unpredictable time than in any other in my 50 years in the force. One of those uncertainties is North Korea, and they came out this week, and they, I don't know if they've announced that they did another nuclear test, but there was an earthquake in North Korea. And this is a graphic that was in the Wall Street Journal the other day showing the increasing size of the yield, the kilotons of TNT equivalent of each of these blasts, and the size of the earthquake. And this was, I think, a 5.3 earthquake on the Richter scale. It was the largest one, and they had an earthquake in Oklahoma a week or so ago that I think was, 5.8, and it caused a fair amount of damage. Actually, as a side to my friend, there were 2 earthquakes in Oklahoma last week. There was the earthquake with 5.8, and then Oklahoma got beat by, was it St. Mary's Little Sisters of the Poor, whoever beat them in that football game. But it was good prep for them because I think they're going to get another earthquake in Oklahoma here coming soon. That's for a friend of mine. He'll know who he is if he listens. Another area that's unstable is Uzbekistan and the Central Asian Republic, Islamic Stan republics. The president there, the dictator who really had opposed Islamic terrorism, he died. And there's a good article in Foreign Policy about when dictators die. The world dictators are aging, but Democrats shouldn't be too quick to rejoice. And nobody really knows what's going to happen. Now, most of this is going to focus now, the rest of this, on the Syria and the Middle East. These are just some headlines that I want to bring together of things happening in the area around and in Israel. Mosul fight already is redrawing the map of northern Iraq. Christians in Egypt are noting more hostility, and they've reached the breaking point. We know that what happened here was that it appears for a while Turkey supported people, and then they didn't support people, and they were aligned with the West, and they were part of NATO, and now they've aligned with Russia, and Russia opposed. It's all very complicated, but Turkey's taking the advantage of things because they want to keep the Kurds pushed down. And this will have an impact on Israel. Here's this article from the Jerusalem Post. The will of the United States of America has rarely carried less weight than it does now in regional affairs, and that means that those of us who worry about regional stability have to work for ourselves. I believe that came from one of the people in the Israeli government. With their moves into Syria, he said, Ankara has demonstrated that we don't care less what the U.S. says or feels about this. We are going ahead with what we see as our national interests, adding that the message is even more troubling considering that Turkey is ostensibly on paper still a NATO ally. And this shows a little graphic showing the growth of the Kurdish areas as the Islamic State has withdrawn from certain areas. They're doing similar and since a lot of them came out of the Iraqi military forces, they didn't have anything to do when we went in and overthrew Saddam Hussein, so that they formed these militias, and one of those grew into the Islamic State. That's my understanding. And as they've gone away, they did remember when during the Iraq War, what did Hussein do? He set all those oil wells in Kuwait on fire. And they said it was going to take 2 years to put it out, but they developed some techniques and everything. But they're doing the same thing. They're opening the wells, letting the oil spill and run through the streets of cities, and then they're lighting it on fire. The Wall Street Journal yesterday had a great article on after ISIS, what happens. Hang on a second, I want to check something. Okay, I don't think I put it in my slides. So there is a YouTube channel. It's called Channel 4 News. And if you go there and you look for who is fighting whom in Syria, you will find a very good graphic presentation. It's good enough, I would say it. It's so good that I wish I'd done it. Okay, that's how good it is. Showing who's fighting who, and you'll see that it gets very confusing very quickly. It's only about 2 minutes and 45 seconds long. It's extremely well done. If I have it here, I'll play it, but I don't think I stuck it in my thing this morning. But the Wall Street yesterday, after ISIS, what happens? And he says this: it may be tempting to ask the question, but it must be asked all the same. What happens once Islamic State fails? The future of the Middle East may well depend on who fills the void that it leaves behind, both on the ground and perhaps more importantly in the imagination of jihadists around the world. Later in the article it says this: the transformation of a de facto state into just another terrorist organization, one increasingly concerned with its own survival and discredited even among many fellow jihadists, is bound to shake the Middle East anew. Dismantling the caliphate won't end the conflict now raging in and around Syria and Iraq, and may even intensify it. Over the past 2 years, the campaign against the Islamic State has brought together an unusually broad coalition that included Western democracies, Russia, Iran, Shiite militias, Turkey, Kurdish militias, and Sunni Gulf monarchies. As Islamic State dwindles, some of these unlikely partners will probably turn on each other as they fight over the caliphate's spoils. And there's a lot of oil and pipelines and stuff that go through Syria, and it's in essence what some of the fight is about. Already, Turkey and U.S.-backed Kurdish forces have clashed in northern Syria over lands recently wrestled from the Islamic State because Turkey doesn't want people to grow. Iraq's Shiite-dominated government is also increasingly squabbling with the leaders of the country's autonomous Kurdish region, with Baghdad refusing to recognize Kurdish control over several areas liberated from the Islamic State by Kurdish fighters. They also quote Ambassador Robert Ford, who was U.S. ambassador to Syria, during this Obama administration. He said this: "I'm very impressed by how much al-Qaeda's leaders have learned from their mistakes and their bad experiences in Iraq. They are much less brutal in Syria than they were in Iraq, and they work with non-jihadi factions, which al-Qaeda in Iraq never did. They are more subtle in their tactics, and they have a lot more local support." And he concludes with this, and this is troubling: "This will make them much harder to contain. It's going to be a much harder job to develop forces to fight them. It's going to be a much harder job to develop public support for that." In other words, we have a problem, we have a fight on our hands. Even if we defeat the Islamic State, even if the Islamic State goes away, al-Qaeda is again on the ascent 15 years to the day after 9/11. And it's going to be very difficult now because they're a little more genteel as part of their jihad methodology. It's going to be harder to fight them, to get the public support to fight them. It's a problem. Here's a great little, you see the people coming from Syria, the refugees. It says, "We're escaping a brutal, violent, oppressive regime," and the Turkish border guard says, "Want to bet? You're coming to Turkey?" And so I want to spend just a couple minutes to go through this. I literally could do an hour on this because Turkey is very significant, but in Commentary Magazine, Michael Rubin, who is a very good analyst of world affairs and geopolitics, particularly in the Middle East as it relates to Israel and Islam and those sort of things, and the current issue of Commentary has an article on Erdogan called "Turkey's Reichstag Fire." Remember, the Reichstag was the fire that happened that Hitler used to kind of consolidate his power. So he's comparing the failed coup in Turkey to what happened with Hitler, which I think is a good comparison. But he says this: "Why have Americans so consistently misread Turkey and Erdogan, its leader, since 2003? Long after Erdogan's implementation of a program to transform Turkey into an authoritative Islamic state," and trust me, I think he's accomplished that goal, "senior American officials were describing Turkey as a model for the Muslim world and Erdogan as a democratic reformer." Now you need to understand Erdogan's background. And Rubin makes this point, is that Americans go to Turkey, they go to Istanbul, and they see a relatively westernized culture. They might go to Ankara, they might go down to the area, the archaeological sites of the seven churches of Revelation, but they don't get out into the hinterlands. And while Erdogan was, and I think this is very significant, maybe from a prophetic standpoint, I'm not drawing any conclusions from this, I'm only stating the facts, and draw with them what you will. But Erdogan was born in Istanbul, but he didn't grow up there. His family's ancestral home was in a little town called Rize on the Black Sea coast in Turkey. If you look at historical maps of the extent of the Assyrian Empire back in Bible times, it included that area up to the Black Sea. So you could say that Erdogan is historically from the area of Assyria. And I think that's important, and it's important for this. This is what Rubin says: "The problem is not only what Americans see, but what they hear. Too many diplomats, politicians, and journalists have a bad habit of believing what interlocutors tell them, especially if they speak the language of Western liberalism." So Erdogan's gotten a pass. And this, you need to understand, he was raised in a very radical Islamic school system in Eastern Turkey. The majority of people in Eastern Turkey were raised in school systems like that. As Erdogan prepared for a visit to the White House just a month before his AKP triumphed in Turkey's November 2002 elections, the New York Times described the former mayor of Istanbul, who had been impeached and imprisoned for religious incitement, as, quote, "a forward-thinking moderate." Erdogan carefully cultivated the American Jewish community during his early visits. What Jewish leaders, however, saw as a genuine desire to promote interfaith dialogue was, for anyone reading Turkey's Islamist newspapers, more a result of deeply ingrained anti-Semitic conspiracies. Since Jews control America, these conspiracy theories go, cultivating American Jews was the path to reach a shadow government right out of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a book whose Turkish translation is readily available in Turkish bookshops and newsstands in pro-AKP towns and Istanbul neighborhoods and other Istanbul neighborhoods. Americans have a very different conception of history than almost any other people on earth. Americans consider anything more than a decade ago to be the distant past and think nothing of moving 1,000 miles away. In fact, you could probably go on the street and ask people, what's 9/11 about? And I'm guessing that a lot of people might not even know the significance of the anniversary today. In Turkey and much of the West, it's the opposite. People are hard-pressed to move 10 miles away from their family, but consider the last 1,000 years as yesterday. It is a different mindset. Most Americans focus on the future unencumbered by slights suffered by their parents, great-grandparents, or co-religionists whom they have never met. But men like Erdogan nurse ancient grudges as if they suffered the slights personally. Erdogan sees himself on a mission not only to right what he considers to be historical wrongs in Turkey, but also to promote Sunni Islam worldwide. And they use the example, I wasn't able to find a picture of this, but when Erdogan used to do like his briefings to the country, he had a set. And on the set was a Turkish flag and a statue or a picture of Ataturk, who was the founder of the supposedly non-Islamic, westernized Turkish empire in 1923. That's when it was founded. And he banned the wearing of the fez and, said that you couldn't have the Islamic manifestations. But there was an undercurrent there, and Ataturk reached out to the West. But at some point in Erdogan's briefings, the set changed. While it used to have a picture of Ataturk, who is highly revered in a large portion of Turkey even today. In fact, you speak against him in Turkey, and that's sort of an automatic jail sentence. And he was a very brutal dictator as well. He put down uprisings, and that led to essentially where we are today. But Erdogan changed the set from the picture of Ataturk to the mausoleum of Ataturk. And that change carried great symbolism to people that were paying attention. Because what he was saying is, listen, folks, Ataturk is dead. There's a new sheriff in town. And he's consolidated his power like this. With Erdogan's opponents on the run and an iron grip on all mechanisms of state, what comes next? In 1994, while still mayor of Istanbul, Erdogan declared, "Thank God Almighty, I am a servant of the Sharia." And the following year, he called himself the Imam of Istanbul. That was the unvarnished Erdogan. He may have promoted an illusion of reform and refinement after the 1997 coup and his subsequent imprisonment, but he has now shed that pretense and embraced an agenda he has nurtured his whole life. He aims not only for larger power and money, but seeks to achieve a larger goal, the complete reversal of Ataturk's reforms. In 2012, Erdogan declared his goal was to raise a religious generation. That same year, doctors diagnosed him with colon cancer and gave him only 2 years to live. Erdogan might have beat that prognosis, but he is conscious of that his time is not infinite. He wishes to see Turkey celebrate its centenary in 2023, not as a secular state envisioned by Ataturk, but as an Islamic republic. So put everything that you see going on in that context. Michael Rubin is 100% correct on this. Now, the U.S. and Iran. The White House is now saying, these things came out that there was these deal exceptions that were made for Iran to develop some centrifuges, and the White House is saying, it's not true, it's not true. You can go and look for the analysis on this, and because I just don't have time to go into it. And this is important, though, because this is from the Daily Mail last week. Inside the glass house, Iran is running covert war in Syria, costing billions from top-secret spy master headquarters near the Damascus airport. So they built this massive building. It's broken down. They've got some intelligence reports. Top Iranian military people are there. They have Iran-led forces, Hezbollah, and others in Syria. And these things are, they have more military people under control of Iran in Syria than they do in the Syrian army. Syria continues to fall apart. It's at best a tragedy. And it's where the world's powers are fighting proxy wars. The UN said this the other day, Syria has become the greatest crisis of our times. Over a third of the country no longer lives in Syria. They're gone. The country is essentially gone. We call it Syria, but it's not. It's really something else. So the other thing that came out was that there were these negotiations early this week about a ceasefire in Syria. So an agreement between the U.S., Iran, and Russia. Then it came out that Iran may have received as much as $33.6 billion, not the $400 million we talked about, not $1.7 billion, but $33 billion in cash and gold payments from the United States. Well, what impact would that have? Well, Russia and Iran just came out and said they're going to build yet a new Iranian nuclear plant. Shmuley Botek, the Jewish rabbi, has a good article in the Jerusalem Post on this past Tuesday. Cory Booker's, he's the mayor of Newark, I believe, and a big player in the Democratic Party of the United States, has come out and defended Iran. And the interesting thing is, he defends Iran, which still says it wants to wipe out the Jews. And he's an important player in the Democratic Party. And he's speaking on this. So you need to keep in mind that, and so now Russia and the U.S. have supposedly brokered a peace agreement, U.S. and Russians forged agreement in Syrian conflict, but then this report was, yeah, they did, but hours after the announcement, Russia bombs kill at least 25 in attack in Idlib in Syria. And then Russia engaged in this display in the Mediterranean, showing the impact of, and if you look at this closer, you can see the concussion wave from the explosion of these thermobaric bombs that they're dropping. So I have to skip through this. So there's a lot of growing anti-Semitism. We'll just have to talk about that next week. This is important. This is from UPI. Israel girds for Golan war with Iran and Hezbollah. There was actually a report issued in July 2016. The coming clash between the Third of Lebanon War, the coming clash between Hezbollah and Iran in the shadow of the Iran nuclear deal. And it goes into the fact that the forces, the Hezbollah forces that clearly are opposed to Israel, they're gathering in the area just on the other side of the Golan border there, near Kenitra. And so the question is, a lot of these things, I'm trying to think here, essentially Israel is coming out and saying it's not a question of if, but when there's going to be some kind of conflict there in the Golan. And then they also said within 6 months, the Israeli Defense Forces said they expect an attack on the southern border. So I've got a couple things. I'm going to go just a little bit. I don't have time to. This is that Israeli most advanced communications satellite called the Amos 6. Was on the pad in Cape Canaveral to be launched last week, and it exploded. Now what I did was I adjusted the sound because what you'll see, the cameras were several miles away. New York Times had an article about Israel putting outposts into the West Bank. I'll try to talk about that a little bit later because I want to get to this article. Two things. With regard to the settlements, Prime Minister Netanyahu had this to say in this little video that I pulled off his website.
I'm sure many of you have heard the claim that Jewish communities in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, are an obstacle to peace. I've always been perplexed by this notion, because no one would seriously claim that the nearly 2 million Arabs living inside Israel, that they're an obstacle to peace. That's because they aren't. On the contrary, Israel's diversity shows its openness and readiness for peace. Yet the Palestinian leadership actually demands a Palestinian state with one precondition: no Jews. There's a phrase for that. It's called ethnic cleansing. And this demand is outrageous.
Well, he goes on, you can see the whole video. And he's right. They want to remove the Jews from the area that the Palestinians will control. There's no claim the other way to get Palestinians and Arabs out of the areas that the Jews control. But Jews, that we have to get rid of all of those people. And here's the headline from the Jerusalem Post this morning in the upper right-hand corner. U.S. sees over Prime Minister's ethnic cleansing video. Our government's upset that the Prime Minister of Israel actually said that. This will not end well. The Hill blog has Israel victory is the only way to advance the peace process. A couple days ago, I would highly recommend that you go to read that. I want to finish up with Caroline Glick's article in the Jerusalem Post titled Mahmoud Abbas and Other Soviet Ghosts, because I think this will put in. Just give me a couple minutes. She first notes that there's a couple books that she's looked at. Red Horizons, published about 1997, and The World Was Going Our Way, the KG Battle and the Battle for the Third World. These are excellent books about how the KGB engages in disinformation. There's some interesting things in here, though. She says this. In 1982, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority right now, received a doctorate from the Patrice Lumumba University, or KGBU, in Moscow. According to KGB defectors, 90% of the university's faculty and staff received their paychecks from the KGB. Russia, you need to understand, all the stuff you see Russia doing, you need to look through it with a very huge magnifying lens and discernment to understand that Russia is still engaged in a lot of deception and misdirection. Its purpose was to train KGB agents from the developing world, including terrorists. Abbas's fellow alumni included master terrorist Carlos the Jackal and future Iranian dictator Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the current supreme leader of Iran. Abbas received a doctorate for a thesis denying the Holocaust. That is, he used the cover of academia to vilify the Jewish state and deny Jewish history and suffering, a practice that has been a stock in trade ever since. Rather than devote his energies to murdering Israelis along the lines of the subversive program Ceausescu, the Romanian dictator, presented to Arafat, Abbas's main focus was the subversion of the European and Israeli left. And Caroline goes on to describe how they've infiltrated these leftist groups, and these are leftist groups that are in control of policy in Washington. And if you don't think there's been an influence there, by the way, she says this, Abbas focused his efforts on developing ties to the Israeli far left. His efforts culminated in the 1993 Oslo Peace Accord deal, which Abbas negotiated with Israeli leftist activists affiliated with then Foreign Minister Shimon Peres through his deputy, Yossi Beilin. And there, at the signing on the White House in September of 1993, you see Rabin, Arafat, Warren Christopher there to the right, and to the right of him, who? Mahmoud Abbas, because he was the architect of that Oslo Peace Accord. The PLO's success in convincing the Rabin-Peres government that it had abandoned its goal of annihilating Israel came 2 years after the demise of the Soviet Union. In other words, the KGB's campaign of anti-Western subversion outlived the Soviet Union. So when you see things like this going on, that Russia is now involved in brokering a peace agreement between the Palestinians and Israel, you need to look at that with great concern. The Washington Post this week said, oh, well, Russia's suspected of a scheme to disrupt the elections here in the United States. Now, I think what the Washington Post is doing is they're falling prey to Russian propaganda, and they're trying to say that we've got to get rid of this. Just one more minute. So Western elites are, they're not really that concerned about the country, and it's just, you need to go read Caroline's article about Mahmoud Abbas. It's in the Friday Jerusalem Post. There was one other thing I wanted to do. Well, I have massive amounts. Look, you need to be paying very close attention to what's going on in the Middle East. I'll maybe try to do an update this week if I have some time. I'm not sure I will, but I'll try to maybe put this together a little bit better. So let's pray and pay attention to what's going on, folks, because our government's messing around with Israel does not end well. Ceausescu was involved in this, getting the PLO going against Israel. How did that end for Ceausescu? God is not mocked. Eventually, God's going to deal with this. So let's pray and go. Father, again, thanks so much for your word. Thanks for the guidance that you give us. We pray that you'll bless us this week. Bless Jacob as he speaks to us this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.